Hello, and welcome back to Quiet RC. I'm Rob, and today we're going to talk about my Tamiya Super Clodbuster build and why you should never meet your heroes. Shh. Let's get into this Tamiya Super Clodbuster build. All right, some of my more astute viewers might notice that the body is missing. That is because I'm actually doing a non-box art custom airbrush paint job, everything like that. And because it's an ABS, i.e. it's like hard plastic, it's not like clear Lexan, I'm having to kind of teach myself some new techniques and everything like that. So it's just taking a lot longer. I just kind of wanted to get this through and kind of talk about this Clodbuster and how it didn't exactly live up to my expectations, but still looking forward to it. All right, first and foremost, we had the packaging. It's just a massive box. I mean, when you open it up, all the parts are kind of laid out in front of you, sectioned off, and then there's just this one section that is just these four giant tires. I mean, these tires are huge in person. Having dealt mostly with 12 and 10 scale cars, really wasn't ready for that. You can see it kind of compared to both a transmitter and just one of my 12 scale race cars. You'll see that they kind of had this weird kind of Wolverine-esque character that they had in the package. It's also on some of the stock decals that you're supposed to put on there. Just kind of not my style, so we'll see where I'm able to go with it. For this kit, I am going to be using my FlySky Noble NB4. The biggest reason is if I want to, down the road, go with four-wheel steering using two servos as opposed to just the single servo in the middle. That'll allow me to use that because it has a third channel that I can use for the rear steering. I do use that with my Dynahead. Works great because you can actually dial back the rear steering as opposed to having it just be exactly the same, or should I say exactly the opposite of the front. We'll get into the actual build itself now. The kit actually came with four bearings, which is really unusual for Tamiya. Usually it's just all plastic bushings and a couple of maybe of the kind of brass, they call them bearings, but they're really just like frictionless bushings, I guess. And it was just one for each corner on each of the wheels. I don't know why it came with just these four, but I went ahead, like I do with all my Tamiya kits that I get, and just got a package of the fast eddy bearings that matched the kit that I was building. Wildly reasonable pricing for what you're getting. Absolutely would just do that straight off the bat. Whatever online, I see somebody asking, "Oh, I'm about to get this Tamiya kit. What should I get?" Every answer, including mine, is get a set of bearings. Period. End of story. And as you're going through, it is pretty similar to a lot of other Tamiya kits as far as what the breakdown and the setup of the manual is. But you get to this one point where it says, "Okay, steps 9 through 26. Do it twice," and that's just like so demoralizing. When you're going through, you are building identical front and rear diff cases where the motor at each end, because it does do dual motors, is going to be held. It uses all the same suspension front and rear, uses all the same gearing front and rear, same differential front and rear, same springs front and rear. The only difference is you will have a little bit of a difference in the actual steering linkage front and rear. However, with the Clodbuster, the steering servo is actually mounted right in the middle and has two rods that go out to either end, and then they just go on some cranks that actually do the steering, and you'll see down the road what kind of issue that causes. Building the front and the rear differentials, I did miss just one brass piece that went on part of the drive shaft, and because the wheels kind of worked, you had the differential action, I actually almost missed it and would have built the whole kit and had to tear apart the whole thing. But thankfully, one of them was not functioning just right enough where it made me tear them both apart. Looked through the parts list again, saw that I had missed it for both the front and rear. So I just kind of had to redo both the front and rear differential just a little bit and put them back together, and then everything was fine. Be careful. This goes for every Tamiya kit, every kit in general. Just double check the actual screw that you are being told to use, because visually it might look very similar, and then you might have to tear it all apart again. And I think I had to do that for part of the part of the suspension here, the brass ball ends. They're just barely the wrong size. They do provide a little tool, and part of that tool helps you align the pinion for each motor in the right spot. Not unheard of for Tamiya kits. I've had several kits where they offer some sort of, either with the tool or with some sort of part that you can snip off the sprue that will actually help you align the pinion in the right spot. Just kind of a nice thing that Tamiya actually does. A lot of other kits I've built don't do that. You're kind of forced to kind of figure out exactly where it needs to line up. So, I mean, this suspension setup is really like nothing I've ever seen before that I've built. Maybe there are a lot of other kits, but I assume this is very similar for kind of real world monster trucks, where you have this whole thing that comes here. It's not quite like that kind of, you know, multi 4-link suspension, whatever, because it does kind of attach to itself here, and where it kind of clears the motor. Now, the thing that is bad and that contributes to how well this doesn't handle is that you have the motor, all of the gears, all of the steering and everything like that are all kind of mounted on the axle, and so they become essentially unsprung weight. So that would be anything that's on top of your suspension is sprung weight, and that helps to control it. When it's unsprung, like it is down here, there's nothing that the suspension can do to control that weight and how it's getting tossed around. So that contributes to why it's so difficult with handling. Building the shocks themselves, because they're basically just friction shocks, there's not any oil to put in, there's no pistons, there's no O-rings or anything like that. They just kind of all just screw together. There's a little bit of rubber tubing that limits the how far it can travel. So even though there's 8 of them, it goes really quickly. Now, you do have kind of an odd assembly for the wheel hubs. It's not just as simple as the hex going into the wheel itself and then you clamping it together. The hex kind of goes into a hub, and then that hub then goes onto some posts that are some really shallow posts that are inside the rim itself. So maybe those are 2 failure points, but I haven't had it fail on me yet. But if you have, by all means, mention in the comments. We'll see. As I mentioned, I'm doing a custom non-box art paint job. One of the things I decided to do to, I guess, punish myself is I am taking all the chrome off of all the parts that Tamiya supplied chromed. You do this by dunking it in degreaser. I think it's called Purple Power is the stuff that I'm using. I've found that if you scuff it a little bit, it helps to speed up that process. It's really interesting. Some of it will kind of dissolve in like an hour, and sometimes it takes overnight. And then I go over it with just some more sandpaper. I learned this from watching some other videos on actual just plastic static models that folks have done. Because when you cut the pieces off of the molding sprue, where it connects is not covered in chrome. It's not like it's molded out of chrome colored plastic. It's plastic that's chromed. So when you cut it, there's a little missing piece. So just as kind of practice and wanted to challenge myself, that's what I'm doing. I'm also using the kind of more tame or toned down or less ridiculous looking hood scoop supercharger thing. Just don't want to detract too much from the paint job. Okay, so the driving itself, it's really bad. You'll see in some of these videos that I can't really, even a 35 kilogram high torque servo can't really overcome the amount of slop and how thin and flexible these steering rods are. So you have lots of points where you can get more and more flex and slop. You have the fact that it's mounted in the middle, 2 ball ends, and then it goes either direction, these long rods that will flex, and then they go to 90-degree bell crank or crank kind of fittings, and then those go out to the wheels, and the wheels are gigantic. There's a lot of contact area, so when it tries to turn, it's not turning very well. For whatever reason, mine right now, it seems to favor turning the rear wheels, which makes it very difficult. Now, when I try to run it up the hill run, this is something I've done with a few of my cars. I have some times on them. Further down the line, I'll have a video on some of my hill climbs with the various vehicles. but it made it very difficult to drive up the hill. Now, when I took it into kind of the dirt area of our property, it actually was a lot of fun and strangely enough handled a lot better. It's kind of like once it started bouncing around all over the place, it allowed the tires and the wheels to free up, and the servo was just able to kind of do its job, and it just kind of went where I wanted it to go. So for the most part, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, you don't always want to meet your heroes. Now, it's not entirely true that the Clodbuster was a hero of mine back in the day when I was working at a hobby shop outside of Chicago, Illinois. What was really the hero was in the back of RC Car Action, seeing the ads for all of the crazy chassis that you could get for monster trucks. So I built this, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. That's why I went to ukmonsters.co.uk and got all of these chassis parts. I've got alloy braces, steering linkage, I've got top link mounts, lower link mounts, and most importantly, I have the Razor 2.1 chassis for the Clodbuster with these cantilever suspension. And soon I'll be getting probably just some racing 80mm shocks. I also got two 17-turn motors from Holmes Hobbies that'll go on to each one, and I have another 35-kilogram high torque servo. So I'll have a 35-kilogram high torque servo for each axle. So this is going to be just a part one. We'll get to that later. Until then, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll talk to you later.